Welcome everyone to another video, and in this video we are going to be doing what I termed as, I'll probably change the term, as the top trainers talk. I thought that was a clever title, and I'm joined today with ValorAsh and Guan87. ValorAsh is the Austin regional champion, and Guan is the Montreal regional champion. How are you two doing today?
I'm doing great. This is Guan here.
I'm also fantastic.
All right, perfect. So let's just start by getting to know you two. Guan, why don't you start? Tell us about your Pokemon Go journey and how PvP has really influenced your journey.
All right. I'm kind of going by the go here. Haven't really had much time to prepare the answer, but Pokemon Go, it's definitely, most people call it a game, but I would like to kind of, ever since it came out, I always considered it as more of a social application, more than a video game in itself. I feel like the game has brought a lot of people together through various local communities and the likes. So ever since the start, I've been really passionate about it. I've been involved in various different communities and even started my own within downtown Toronto in the financial district. So shout out to everyone there. So I guess since 2016, Pokemon has been out, and PvP has always been something I was looking forward to. And I guess a little bit late, but 2 years later, here it is. And really excited about it and hoping to see a lot good feature coming up, and looking forward to the future of Pokemon Go PvP.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Guan. How about you, ValorAsh, or Mason, however you want to be referred?
Yeah, you can just call me Mason. I was a big Ingress player, Niantic's other game, which got me a beta invite to Pokemon Go. So I've been playing since the beta. And then since the early days, I got involved with the Silph Road stuff, trying to provide data sets and like observations of the field based on what I found in the beta. So right off the bat, as soon as the game launched, I was, very, very into Pokemon Go. Attended Go Fest for the last 2 years, and then my gameplay dropped off a little bit after the second year's Go Fest. But PvP came out, and that definitely caters to the competitive side of me. So once PvP came out, I was definitely back in the hardcore set of players.
All right, perfect. Were you guys big Pokemon fans before the game came out?
I personally, I guess Pokemon goes back to my childhood, and I still remember back in elementary school how heartbroken I was when I lost my original Pokemon Red, or sorry, not Red, it was Blue and Yellow. So those are the two that I had. I spent a lot of hours on it, and then I actually lost the game cartridge. So
no.
That was like a devastating moment for me. But aside from that, I was all about Pokemon Generation 1, but after that, haven't really followed since then after moving on.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Mason?
I was on a little bit later side of things. My first game was Fire Red, and then my absolute favorite mainstream game was Emerald. Generation 3 was like my generation. That's the one that I put a lot of hours into.
Oh wow! So yeah, you came pretty late to the series.
Yeah, I was into like the Pokemon collecting cards and the games and all that.
All right, great.
Oh, did you get a Charizard?
No, I never got a Gen 1 Charizard.
Oh
wow. Okay. Well, now you can at least use it in your battles now. So let's walk through some questions these are questions that people posted to me on Twitter. So the first question is from Maddie, Madison Kate 2016 on Twitter. She wants to ask, walk us through your regional cup teams and your thoughts behind them. So why don't we start with Guan again?
Sure. Actually, earlier today, I was able to watch some of Mason's footage from his regional, and that was like my first exposure, his thought process and team selection. And based on that video, it's very similar to how I designed my team. and actually there was a lot of similarities in terms of our move selection on primarily Azumarill and Haunter. So my thought process going into the regional cup, so I was actually originally planned on going to the Toronto one, but because of some vacation conflict, I had to kind of rush my practices and enter the Montreal one that happened last weekend. So my team is quite, I would say, meta. Originally, when I selected Haunter, because he was one of my favorite Pokemon back in childhood days, even growing up, between Haunter and Gengar, actually selected him literally the first day of Twilight Cup announcement. The moment I noticed Ghost was there, I tried to see if he was feasible. And throughout Twilight, I practiced with Haunter quite a bit. So going to regional, I remember the first thing I did was to try to squeeze Haunter into it. And then literally a week later, it was being all over the place as the counter meta. It became the meta going to regional. And then aside from Haunter, I guess the rest of my team was quite the meta in terms of Skarmory, Bastiodon, Azumarill, Medicham, and Venusaur. So originally, I actually practiced a team of Double Dark with Haunter and Sableye, but I just realized at the end of the day, you need all the different coverages, and the meta team did its. The meta team, it is what it is. It's meta for a reason. You need all the different coverage from all those different Pokemon. And I guess Haunter is just, I would say, kind of like the anti-meta pick for myself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all I have.
And I know you ran you guys each ran a Shadow Ball Hunter. And Guan, you were actually telling me a story over WhatsApp, how that Shadow Ball was able to help you pull out a win in your final round.
Oh yes, that was the most epic win. And I just want to give a quick shout out to Kenny too. He was actually the person who convinced me to change my Haunter literally during my morning train to Montreal. So that was like 5.5-hour train. So I was just having a conversation with him, and he mentioned to me about, so originally I was practicing the Sludge Bomb Shadow Punch version, but when he mentioned to me how, a Shadow Ball can take out Skarmory, well, I kind of knew that before, but it just never practicing with the meta, given the 1 to 2 weeks time that I had, I thought maybe Sludge Bomb, it was good against Tropius, Azumarill. So it's just what I was practicing with. I've always had the legacy Shadow Ball Haunter, but anyways, I made that decision that morning based on the fact that it's Skarmory. And just to go back to the comment in the Montreal round 5, so that's the final round. In game 1, I actually came into the scenario where I had the kind of like the bad start. So I started with Bastiodon, and my opponent started with Medicham. So that's a horrible matchup as a start. And I immediately had to switch to Haunter. And he actually had a Sableye as a counter swap. So I thought, like, in that type of scenario, the game is pretty much over. But I was able to actually activate a Shadow Ball on the Sableye, in which my opponent did not shield. So that literally turned the game over, because I actually killed the Sableye with the Shadow Ball, and basically the momentum was on my side, and I won that game. So that was one of the biggest moments that I would see myself using that Haunter with the Shadow Ball.
Yeah.
And it happened in the finals, game 1, losing start. So
that's amazing. And all you're really hoping to expect is for them to burn a shield and then come out.
Yeah, I guess. It's hard because I think most people did not have enough practice against Haunter. And also people are expecting you to, fake or use Sludge Bomb and not really expecting Shadow Ball, or maybe just the timing wise, they didn't think Shadow Ball was up, so they didn't shield.
Yeah. Adrenaline's rushing. It's hard to keep track. Even the best of us lose that. So that's awesome. So Mason, why don't you walk us through your team? I know it's been highly covered on Elite Four TV, and you commenting and Blandon giving the intro. But why don't you just walk us through your team and your high level thoughts behind it?
I'm gonna jump right back on the Haunter hype train. I ran a Shadow Ball Haunter as well. I had a Sludge Bomb one for the longest time, but once I started looking into unique picks, it was actually Tristan, or T. Wastel, the guy from Seattle. He talked me into flying up to Seattle for their tournament. He was the one that said, hey, Glade looks like it has pretty good coverage against the meta. So once I started to look into Glade, I was like, I eventually pulled the trigger on one. It left me with 1 Stardust, but the second I started using it, I fell in love with it, just because not many people knew how to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And so bringing Glade, I also had to bring the Shadow Ball Haunter for that extra Skarmory coverage.
Yeah.
And then I liked Melmetal as well. I practiced extensively with both Bastiodon and Melmetal. And while Melmetal loses to Bastiodon, it has the ability to go through both Azumarill and Skarmory, and it also has a favorable matchup even against the Hydro Pump Azumarill. Granted, it shields the Hydro.
Yeah.
So I just appreciated its volatility a little more over Bastiodon. And then, of course, I bought along the power trio of Azumarill, Medicham, and Skarmory.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I think a lot of actually Twastel DM me about Glade, and I kept looking through my Ralts, and I couldn't find a male Ralts that was actually gonna evolve to test out Glade. And then obviously now you've created this massive Glade hype train. I think we saw PV Poke post that there's a significant increase on page views with using Glade. So we'll see how that plays into the meta, which plays into my next question from Celeb Force. I'm not sure this is the same guy that won the Atlanta regionals, but it's a very good question. If you were competing in the regional tournament this weekend, what changes would you make to your team? So Mason, why don't we start with you?
Personally, I don't think that I'd make any changes to my lineup right now. I've had people come to me. I've practiced. People have tried to create the anti-ValorAsh line, which I thought was kind of funny. And so I've been practicing against those lines. And even then, the line has held its ground. I tried to balance it as well as I could without creating any like super exploitable lineup flaws in it.
Yeah.
So I honestly don't think that I would make any changes going into week 2 with my team.
Yeah, makes sense. How about you, Guan? Any changes that you would make, given things that were been posted and what's been reported from the Self Arena Reddit and the Go Stadium Discord?
Yeah, let's just start by saying that I was lucky that I didn't run into any Galay in the Montreal Regional, because after the tournament, we saw some results. I think I saw a ValorAsh team or Mason's team, saw the Galade. I briefly kind of looked it up on my train ride to Montreal, potentially between Noctowl, Beedrill, and Galade, and I kind of wrote it off in a sense that I didn't think it was that great against Azumarill. But after the tournament, I did some more research, and I realized that Galay actually checks a good, basically 5 out of my 6 Mon in my team. So, or it either checks it or it's 50-50 and only losing to Skarmory. So it's definitely a anti-meta for first week or week 1 meta. So going into week 2, this coming weekend, I guess one of the biggest thing is to prepare for the Galade and the other kind of monster that's popping up from week 1 that's outside of the scope meta. So in order to counter Galade, I would just to my team personally by most likely switching out Bastiodon for Melmetal and also considering Lugia as my flyer. I actually thought about also doing like Tropius and Lugia to kind of split up the coverages, but I think that's going way out of scope. So there's definitely some changes to week 2, especially with the rise of Galay.
Yeah, for sure. At least for me personally, my tournament's not till the weekend after the last weekend, the last day of regionals, and I'm gonna watch how prevalent Glade is. And I've already started practicing with Tropius as opposed to Venusaur in preparation for.
But I was just gonna say, in terms of Tropius, I'm actually heavily considering the Air Slash version.
Yeah, someone commented on one of my videos, and I was just running actually some sims while I was setting some things up for here. So obviously, more favorable matchup against the Medichamp and quicker energy generation to get to Leaf Blade. The only concern is matchup with Azumarill is not, it doesn't swing in your favor in the 1 and 2 shield scenario. I believe I could be wrong, but I need to double check that. But that was my concern. But it's something that
it just
I'm gonna practice.
I think also out of week 1, I think an off meta pick like one of the Mud Boys, namely Whiscash, did kind of look like it underperformed, but I've always had a high expectation of Whiscash pulling it off, especially towards the end of the 4 weeks or 3 weeks of the regional season. I always had a high hope, but it's just a matter of opening up your lineup for a space for it. I feel like the only way to do it is by having these hybrid Pokemon such as Galay, Tropius, or even Lugia.
Yeah, certainly we saw a popular video pop up regarding Lugia. Mason, what were your thoughts on? Have you seen that video by
Caleb?
Caleb Pang or something from Atlanta or Atlanta region.
Yeah, I love that entire post and the video. Lugia was completely off my radar, and people had asked me about it. I was like, it's basically Altaria, but worse.
Mm-hmm.
And then Caleb totally proved me wrong. He ran extra sensory on it, which was not something I'd really ever considered. And really kind of secured it as a psychic type within the meta. And without like psychic being a premier type, like the poison types, I feel have a little bit more leeway to become really powerful because they not only resist fighting but deal super effective damage to Azumarill. So I felt like there needed to be a psychic presence on the team still, and Caleb found a way to do that with Lugia, and I was extremely impressed with his out of the box thinking and his bold nature and like bringing something that nobody else had really considered and making it work.
Yeah, and I think he ran it almost every single time, if not every single time.
Every single game, which is not something I would do with Gallade.
Yeah, that's but it is the at least compared to Skarmory and Altaria does beat Medichamp in all even shield scenarios, even at the 0 shield. So something that certainly I think caught a lot of people's eyes, and we'll see how many people run it. It obviously has a high cost to it. You have to trade down for it, and it does cost a lot of candy to double move in and whatnot. So we'll see how prevalent it is. So here's another question, and I'm sure your time frame is shorter than most people, but how much time do you spend preparing for a meta before you're feeling confident with your team of 6? And this is by the Lured Up podcast. So why don't we start with you, Guan?
Preparation. Unfortunately, I find myself lacking time to actually do physical battles, but I do ponder a lot and often, like either biggest part of, I guess, success is I'm able to spend a lot of time analyzing my team, coming up with many different lineup. And what I like to do with my lineup is I do something called, I myself call stress testing.
Mhm.
So I try to run lineup against the worst possible scenario and try to design that lineup so that it has a chance to come back. So I find myself most of my practice is designing the best lineup and thinking of how to change your team on the spot based on what your opponent presents with their 6.
Yeah.
Like I had literally 1 week of solid practice leading up to the regional this past weekend. One of the guy here in Toronto, Jay Cho, he's usually available all the time for me to practice with. So he's one of my primary practice partner going to the regional, and I expect them to do really well in the Toronto one. So that's what I have for this.
All right, perfect. How about you, Mason?
The best way to prepare and like
Yeah, how much time before you feel comfortable with your team of 6?
I honestly don't know that I ever reach a point with feeling comfortable with my 6. Until Guan said, until you start stress testing it and start running it against the worst case scenarios.
Yeah.
And once you can come out with wins against your worst case scenarios and against your extremely unfavorable lineups is when you start to know that you have a good 6. And I honestly didn't start to feel good about it until 2 days before the tournament. But as soon as regionals was announced, I was running simulations. I was trying to hop into battles. One of the greatest things that I attribute a lot of my success to is I have amassed about 70, 80 ultra friends. And I'll go through maybe 15, 10 different partners a night just running a best of 5, and I like to see what strategies they use to counter my team and unique strategies that they also bring, and I'll try and either imitate it or find ways to beat it. So I stress test it, not necessarily just butting heads with one player over and over and over, but against a large multitude of players that each have an individual way of combating my team.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys have different approaches to reach success, given your different constraints and time schedules and how you like to approach it. So I think that's good. But ultimately, I think like any great player, anything great, you're always trying to push yourselves and not feeling comfortable until very close to the tournament. So it makes total sense. So now that we talked about teams of 6. Why don't you talk me through your thought process around building your lines of 3 when you see your opponent's teams? What are your considerations? And this is a question from Reza. So Mason, why don't we start with you?
One of my favorite combinations to run as a pair in the back, especially if I'm confident that I can pull off a win in the lead, is Azumarill with Hydro Pump and Skarmory, just because in the lead situation you tend to burn a lot of shields struggling for that switch priority.
Yeah.
And Azumarill with Hydro Pump can clean out many shields down, and Skarmory also is very useful shields up or shields down, but it also picks up a win against Metacham in the 0 shield and 1 shield situation. So I like to have them as a good duo in the back, especially if I don't see an electric presence. That's kind of my default lineup, but if I see Melmetal or Lantern or something, I usually have to tweak my lineup just a little bit to where I don't end up bringing both Azumarill and Skarmory.
So you like to favor where there's Pokemon that are very good at closing, at least for your 2 Pokemon that you're hiding in the back, because you do see the struggle for the lead situation to prevent switch priority being shifted.
Right.
Okay, makes sense. How about for you, Guan? How do you build your team of 6 when you see your opponent's team, and what are your considerations?
Yeah, so very similar to Mason. based on looking at your opponent's 6, you can normally identify 1 or 2 key weaknesses in your team that you would try to avoid playing either one or both, especially in the example of Lantern Melmetal. I think one of my matches in the Montreal Regional, someone had both, and I was very hesitant. I think between all the matches, I've actually changed up all my generic line that I had, and I have to kind of accommodate based on what I see. Because whenever I see a Mud Boy, I'm hesitant to play my Bastiodon. Whenever I see Sableye, then I have to be careful with Haunter. I saw a lot of Melmetal where before I was expecting more Bastiodon, so I think because of the presence of Melmetal, I was playing a lot less Azumarill throughout the course of my tournament, especially like what Mason said, Azumarill with Skarmory. It's not a good mix against a team with Melmetal. So I find that I switch from my lineup during between the rounds, switching out Azumarill for Medicham when I see a lot of Melmetal. And like what Mason said, I also ran Hydro Pump on my Azumarill, and I've always treated my Azumarill, even back in Twilight Cup, as my closer. I don't think I've ever started with Azumarill, but maybe that's something I'll surprise someone else down the road.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They're gonna think they got the edge on Guan, and you'll surprise them with the Azumarill lead.
Yeah,
that's great. No, that makes total sense, and I think that's really insightful thoughts that you guys have. So now that you thought about, I'm sure we've all run into the situation where you're looking at your opponent's team and they're running a very anti-meta or off-meta team, a Pokemon that you didn't necessarily or may not have like ran a lot of simulations against your team. Like how do you prepare for that, and what are some of your thoughts and considerations when you see a Pokemon that you haven't ran a lot of simulations against and or are really off meta? And this is a question from Sean Jacob. So Mason, why don't we start with you?
Who was that? Sorry, you cut out for a second.
Oh, Mason, we'll start with you.
Oh, okay. Preparing for the off meta. If there's something that I haven't seen a lot of simulations for, I'll just try to bring the most powerful Pokemon that I can. Just Medicham, Azumarill, Skarmory. Generally with the typing though, I run so many simulations and I play against so many people that I pick up a lot of experience against things like Kanto Buck or other things you wouldn't really expect to see in people's lineups. So luckily I get to see that through stress testing my lineup. And also running simulations can help with that. But if you see something that you're not sure how to handle, do your best, I suppose, to like figure out its typing in your mind and like what sets it would run. And usually they're like very highly specialized counters. If they're completely off your radar, they're usually highly specialized counters to like 1-2 Pokemon on your team. And that's it. They fill that very niche role. And there's only 31 Pokemon that beat Medicham if you double shield. So if I don't see a Pokemon that's on that list, I usually will bring Medicham, and he'll just punch his way right through the opposition. And then you can either that, or you can try and just outbulk it with Bastiodon.
Yeah, makes
because
sense.
usually they tend to be more on like the higher attack side or the frailer side of things if they're not seeing.
Yeah, makes sense. How about for you, Guan? How do you prepare against the anti-meta, and what are your thoughts and reactions?
Going to week 1, I wasn't gonna expect a lot of anti-meta or anything that's very specialized in countering, the 6 or the 5+1. And in our PvP chat, or I have a little group chat, we talk a lot about anti-meta every month after each cup. Usually I'm like the person who's starting the topic, always picking something that's fun and unique and just, it jumps out as something that we call an anti-meta, but that's usually something that can counter the anti-meta and eventually rose up to be part of meta. Like I'm trying to think of examples from every cup that does something like that. It's usually a Pokemon that's mentioned early, got dropped off, and then, in the last 2 weeks of all the tournament results, you see them, rise in power, and everyone's using it. So
I
guess within my practice group, we try to practice a lot on, these anti-meta Pokemon against the meta. So I guess that's most of our preparation. It's just the group I practice with. We test out different things, usually a lot of anti-meta involved. So I'm usually exposed to a lot of these surprise picks. But like I said earlier, going to week 1, I wasn't expecting too much. So I was just trying to practice my A game against the meta, which was the 5+1.
That's interesting. So you're observant on when the tournament is taking place and how that will influence the shifts in meta or the rise in anti-meta. So that's great. Okay, so here's a really good question that's by Trader Frog, and I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with. Is how do you prepare or master the use of shields? So Guan, why don't we start with you? What are your considerations? What have you found tactics or considerations that you found that have been very useful for you to help you win in your tournaments?
Okay, I'll start, I guess. So use of shields. I wanted to allude to that earlier when we were talking about team designs of 3. The way I approach a lot of my gameplay is try to identify my MVP within each game, because no matter what, out of your 6 or out of the 3 that you're using, there's always going to be one Pokemon that kind of stands out, and it's probably the one that will 2-for-1 your opponent's 3 if you allocate your shield resources to that Pokemon. I know early on and even before, there's a lot of emphasis on, using your shield on your first monster, playing the generic game of winning the opener, and then, you get to see your opponent's second monster, and then you just try to counter that and play the whole rock, paper, scissors. But I think as Pogo PvP transitioned throughout the months, I think people adapted to many new strategies, surprise swap, and all these little game mechanics that you can use nowadays, which I guess we'll talk about later on. So I think everything has transitioned, and along with that, a lot of people are preserving shields and knowing when to save it to the end, and or similar to my approach, their shields for that MVP of that match or of that game.
Perfect. Mason, what are your thoughts around preparing or mastering the use of shields?
Is the key thing is learning your opponent's moveset, or at least knowing what your opponent is going to be bringing against you, and expecting what their typical moveset would be. Usually through running a lot of simulations. I'll watch your live stream, and then one of the things that I like to do on there is that even after you win, you go back and look at what could I have done better? Should I have shielded here? Should I have shielded here? And one of the key things that you do also is you highlight this is how much damage this charge move would have done. This is the charge move I should have used instead. But I guess the best way, honestly, is again just going back to practice, learning what charge moves you can eat and which charge moves you can't. For example, the first power-up punch on a Metasham isn't going to hurt you, but the third and fourth ones are definitely going to start packing a punch. No pun intended. Building off of what was said earlier is finding your opponent's predator point and applying pressure through double shielding a Pokemon to really blast through either 1.5 or 2 of their Pokemon.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I think it makes total sense. And at least for me personally, sometimes I like to play psychology with shields. People love to copycat. So if I know based off how the match is going that in Nightmare Cup, for example, if I'm going to end up with Hypno or Bronzong versus their Dark Pokemon, and I feel like they're going to bring Skunk Tank or Drapion. Those are probably the two most common where I end up in this scenario. Sometimes I'll like purposely use my shields in hopes that they will use it as well. So that way when we end up in the close scenario, it looks favorable. But in the no shield scenario, these huge 1-bar moves can really swing the match in your favor. Okay, great. So we have only a couple more questions for around these PV questions, and then we have a couple of fun ones to wrap up this segment. So what advice would you have to trainers that are just getting into competitive PvP? What resources can they use? Where should they go? How should they approach it? So Mason, why don't we start with you?
I mean, my two favorite things are the Ghost Stadium Discord, because in there you get a whole bunch of unique, different viewpoints from people. They're like, hey, I was running simulations, which I'll touch on in a bit, and I found that, Gallade counters this, or checks, 5 out of the 6 meta Pokemon. So that's usually ground zero for discoveries, is people just messing around, having fun on pvpoke.com. It was made by Matt, or Kakuna, in the Discord. He's in there. That's ground zero for me. That's kind of like the lifeblood of my PvP game, and figuring out what beats what attacks you can take, what charge moves you can tank, and stuff like that. So yeah, if you're ever trying to get good at your game, and especially if you can't practice, just running simulations, looking at how your Pokemon perform in different scenarios with the PvPoke simulator is a great starting point.
Okay, great. So it sounds like using the Go Stadium Discord, using PvPoke to run simulations and matchups. And I know that they have their rankings. And also that question was brought to you by from Twitter, Phoenix Back for Fire. So Guan, how about, what advice would you give to a trainer who's just coming into the PvP scene and wants to get into the competitive scene?
Yeah, so when it comes to the word competition, competitive, it leads me to think, people coming from other games who are competitive in other video games, getting straight into Pogo PvP in a competitive way. And I think Mason covered that really well in terms of going on the Go Stadium Discord and just, analyzing all the simulations and trying to get an edge through that way. But in terms of an advice to anyone getting into Pogo PvP, I think the biggest thing is you need to enjoy it. You need to be a part of a group that you'll enjoy playing PvP. You find passion in it. Because at the end of the day, if you don't like what you're doing, no matter how hard you're trying to push that competitiveness, there's always going to be different frustration, things like that. Because I believe Pokemon Go PvP is still in its infancy. There's a lot of different mechanics and other things that can be improved. And for anyone that's want to jump straight into competitive PvP, they're going to run into a lot of frustration. So you got to like to play it. You got to have a good group to play with. You just got to enjoy it. That's
perfect. Yeah, I think
how I see it.
I think that's excellent advice on top of Mason's. Definitely enjoying what you're doing is going to allow you to put more time and effort and get you over the frustrations that you might occur when you're doing Pogo PvP. And here's a really broad question, and hopefully you guys have put some thought into this. And this is brought to you by Battle Hero. If you could make one change to the game, what would you do to improve the PvP system? So, Guan, why don't we start with you?
So just as I just talked about infancy to Pogo PvP, there's definitely a lot of small mechanical things within Pogo PvP that's not straightforward, and you would only, know about this through doing extensive research. I did come across a Reddit post from Silverina that's from like 25 days ago, which I'll provide the link later. Maybe you can put in the footnote. It's a very good article explaining every little mechanic of Pokemon PvP. And if you can find the time to read it and master everything that is said there, you're pretty much halfway to being really competitive. Because I think out of small mechanics, you can find a huge competitive advantage using a lot of the existing mechanics that's built in. And if there was one change that I would want, is one of the most recent discovery. I think King, you made a video about it. Is the queuing of basically eliminating a fast attack via clicking a charge move right after your opponent. I think that just creates a very frustrating PvP experience. I don't know. I don't want to go too much details into that mechanic, but it's in one of King's video from it's in one of your video in the past 3 days. So
certainly.
Anyone interested to know about that?
And even at the end of that video, I mentioned I'm not sure if this is a good or bad thing for PvP. So I was I was even hesitant to after just doing some testing. I was actually a little hesitant to even making the video. I made the video so that people are aware, but I'm a little bit worried on how.
Been around. Yeah, it's been around since the very beginning. So it's not something that just got implemented, but
Absolutely.
I think it's just being discovered and being used in a way where people can take advantage of what, it changes the flow of the battle a little bit, and people overthinking it's just creating another complexity into the gameplay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So how about for you, Mason? If you could make one change to the game, what would you do to improve the PvP system?
Besides the obvious, user interface changes, not getting stuck on like the switch Pokemon when you want to burn a shield, use a charge attack, stuff like that. Changes that I'd like to see that I think would bring improvement would be a wider move pool available to each of the Pokemon. You'd still have to pick and choose which ones you want to bring to battle. But for example, like Mew is one of my favorite Pokemon to bring because it's just a fun wheel of really, really powerful charge moves, and you don't know what it's going to bring to battle. But I think that adding a larger move pool will enable people to tailor their team to cover certain weaknesses, and also add their own personal flair instead of, only having to choose between Ice Beam, Hydro Pump, and Play Rough on Azumarill. You can, for example, choose between 7 or 8 charge moves that Azumarill learned in the main game. That also lets you just tailor more your personal style.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And hopefully, Mason, when they make that change, you have a lot of charge TMs, so you can pick the right charge move. But I think that's really important, at least for me as well. I get really bored from like very stale metas, or where there's like 4 or 5 Pokemon that you have to bring, or 90% of people bring to tournaments, and then they all contain pretty much the same moveset and lack of variety. I like when there's lots of surprises and lots of different team combinations where Team A can beat Team B and B can beat C, but doesn't mean that A can beat C. I think
right.
Personally, I really enjoy it. So I think adding that unique flair by increasing the number of moves to Pokemon would be super helpful. Okay, great. So now that we've got all the serious talk, there's a couple fun questions from Battle Hero. If you've watched any of Battle Hero's videos, he's a little goofy. He's very informative, but a little goofy. So he actually posted like 20 questions. He was blowing up my Twitter feed, and I had to give him at least a few more. So here's a question. He says, if you could date one adult version of any girl in the Pokemon anime series or game, who would you take to dinner? Again, the adult version, because they're in the game, they're young and stuff. So Guan, why don't we start with you?
Per X3? Oh wait, we're talking about the actual anime, not Pogo. Okay.
Anime or the games. It can be, any.
Yeah, you know what? I actually didn't watch too much of the original Pokemon series. I only remember watching Generation 1, and there was Misty, and that's definitely not someone I want to be associated with. So I guess I will take a pass on this question.
Okay. Fair enough. How about you, Mason?
I don't know. I don't like Misty either. She's just too.
It doesn't have to be
preppy, I
Misty.
guess. I mean,
Okay.
sure, she's cute. It's got to be May. She's
Okay.
competitive. She's intense. I don't know. It'd be May.
Okay, all right.
Who's May?
She's the Gen 3
Oh, okay, that's later on.
rival.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the remake, you could, or in both of them, could you pick either May or who the other character is? Okay. Here's another question, and Guan, no passing on this question. So if there was a Thanos Infinity Stone Gauntlet snap, and you could only keep 3 Pokemon for the regionals to run in every single match, which ones do you bring? Which ones would you lead? And the rest get dusted. So Mason, why don't we start with you?
Oh man, I feel like I'm taking his thunder before he even gets there. Haunter, straight up, man, with Shadow Ball.
Oh
Landing
my god.
Shadow Ball on anything has got to be the most satisfying feeling in the entire world.
And
I
Guan.
started a gallery.
And Guan,
things I've landed Shadow Ball on.
once Mason picks Haunter, your Haunter gets dusted.
Really? Is
Whoa.
that how it works?
Yeah, I'm just making this up. I'm assuming that what Battle Hero would want in that question. So, what are your other two? Or why don't we, Guan, once you pick now? That way, you guys are dusting each other's Pokemon. What would you pick?
So do I? Is this like
You
is
pick
this like
pick
a
one.
League of Legends?
Yeah.
Okay.
Who
Well,
would you
Hunter
pick?
would have been my obvious pick, but I still want to answer the question as a whole because with my style, I would probably pick 3 glass and just kind of YOLO it because nobody's prepared to allocate their shield against 3 glass cannon.
Okay, so what's
So
one?
my
one glass
my
was?
original pick would have been Haunter, Melmetal, and Metachamp.
Okay, if you could only pick between, you can only draft Malmetal or Medicham. Which one's gonna be?
I would probably pick Metacham. I'm gonna
Okay.
say, but it's a monster that's not regional specific, but I would always go to my legacy Magneton. So that's one of the other big time DPS glass cannon, one of my favorite monsters back in the Tempest days.
Yeah, I know that
So
you.
Melmetal is kind of equivalent to that, so I guess Melmetal for me.
All right, Mason. How about for you? Your next pick. This Pokemon you don't want to get dusted.
Man, I'm
by the snap.
kind of on the same page with Glass Cannons. Second pick, it's got a Alolan Raichu, just because you never know if it's going to be Thunder Punch or Wild.
Ooh,
It's
that's
so
true.
much fun.
That's true. I know that was one of your favorites, and that was one of my favorite videos that you posted on Elite Four TV. How about you, Guan? If you were to pick another Pokemon,
Whiscash.
Wishcash.
I think
Okay.
that's the mud boy that you cannot predict in terms of whether or not they're shield baiting or dropping a blizzard on you.
Yeah, and it can be really devastating if you pick wrong, right? Either you wasted a shield, or your Pokemon is now a frozen tundra. How about you, Mason? Last pick. This is the last Pokemon that you can have before everything else in your Pokebox gets dusted.
It's just because Sableye would destroy my team, I've got to bring a Zoomer at this point, and that's okay because he's just like a little round ball of happiness that can absorb a lot of damage and dish back out.
Okay, get the tanky option to round out your team. How about for you, Guan? Last pick.
I guess the third would need to complement my previous pick. So, what's still missing? Maybe Skarmory?
Okay, Skarmory. Okay, that
Yeah.
sounds good. And how do you guys feel if your 3 Pokemon were to battle each other? make the argument for me why your team would come out on top, or why your team wouldn't come out on top?
Oh, I actually have counter, and now that I think of it, to all three of Mason's picks.
I'm not making an argument for the win here. I think he's got I have to catch his Whiscash by Azumarill, and then I don't know. I think I'm pretty much toast.
Yeah, and then the Azumarill will be.
Yeah, I'd have to catch his Whiscash with the Azumarill. That's it.
Okay. All right. Well, perfect. Thank you very much, Guan, and thank you very much, Mason, for joining in this discussion. I think there's a lot of really great insights that you provided for the community, and look forward to sharing this, and best of luck at Worlds.
Awesome.
Yeah, and good luck to everyone else in their upcoming regionals.
All right. Thank you very much.